Welcome to the Sahyoun podcast. Guys, welcome to episode number 8. I have Zach Kongonis on, and I don't know if I pronounced that right.
You butchered that.
I butchered it.
You
Jesus.
butchered it.
Damn.
Kongonis.
I made you sound Mexican instead of Greek. Anyway, guys, Zach is a great coach. He has very similar values to me when it comes to coaching. I'm excited to have him on. I was on a guest on your podcast last week, and we had a great chat. We spoke about a lot of the constraints with combat sport performance. And glad to have you on, Zach. So just tell us a little bit about yourself so the audience can create a little bit of a background picture about you and what you're about.
Yes, as you said, my name's Zach Kongonis. Proud Greek. But I'm about Greek/Mexican. I'm about 10 years into training, 7 years into coaching myself. Started off quite young doing track and field, then moved into some pretty deep powerlifting specific work. And that's where I lived, God, for the last 5 years of my coaching career. After COVID and after some changes in values, I've shifted further outside of the powerlifting space, not really competing in that arena anymore and trying to bring back in some more sport specific or some more general work into my training, which is the part that I've been really enjoying at the moment. And hopefully some of the things we'll be able to discuss today where our values overlap and where this new style of hybrid training, and hybrid training kind of shits me off because it's just good training, but it's the buzzword that people like to use. But yeah, that's the direction that I'm hoping to push forward a little bit more as it stands, and trying to regain some of the movement options that I lost by trying to squat 330 kilos and having consistent spine pain.
That's the price you pay for being a powerlifter, and I guess that's just a sport in nature to be as stiff as possible, to have just enough range of motion to be able to move that weight up and down. So what sparked your interest into actually coaching? What actually got you into the coaching field?
Honestly, just watching people be strong. In the first gym that I trained at on the Central Coast, I was surrounded by some really, really strong people. And that's what sparked my love of strength sports after rehabbing. I had a really bad grade spondylolysis and spondylolisthesis of my lower back. I was on my ass for a little bit, and that's what took me out of track and field. And the fact that strength training was able to take me out of pain, get me back to doing things that I loved, kind of made me want to do that for other people. I saw the value in it. I saw how much it can help and how much of an impact it can make. And I thought that would be a pretty damn nice career to move into. And then I was lucky enough to be given quite a good opportunity from the person who was coaching me at the moment, Will Crozier and Mickey Westcombe. They own Nexus Performance. They brought me on at a very young age and pretty much trained me up, taught me everything. And that's what really pulled me into the industry.
Mm-hmm. Funny, I think Will Crozier trained at my wife's gym, at Squad Gym at some stage. I remember seeing him there. He's a bit of a freak athlete from a powerlifting perspective.
Definitely is.
Yeah, definitely. So the biggest reason why I got you on is because there's certain concepts that I find really fascinating, where I feel like I've learned so much more in the last 12 months in my coaching career over the last 10, 15 years. And I'm really want to get into the nuts and bolts of how we actually look at strength and conditioning, and what are some of the common problems that you see with mainstream strength and conditioning that you've been exposed to that you think could be done better, or a better approach. I usually find, in my personal experience, it was very algorithmic. It was, let's work on one specific quality at a time at the sacrifice of another, and then rotate these qualities throughout the year, and realize that it doesn't really, you can kind of have it all if you have a good, smart approach and you understand just how to prescribe concurrent training models, or just have a better understanding of program design and prescription. What are some of the common problems that you've seen with just your general S&C training at the moment?
I'd have to agree that it's that really modular approach, and that approach that's very heavily based around we're going to do this until we eke out the maximum value. We'll set that point of depreciation, then just put it in the corner and ignore it. Especially if people don't really have many qualities that they're trying to train. Say someone's going to be flipping between strength and hypertrophy, because they're usually the big ones that you'll see for more general population or
Yeah.
people who are just starting to get into training. They'll do a really big phase of hypertrophy, and then they'll do a really big phase of strength, and then they'll just keep flipping between them. And it's the fact that they don't give any of the other qualities enough time to shine, or they don't give the qualities that they're actually working on enough exposure to progress properly. Instead of thinking about it in the terms of, let's have these progress over an extended period, because let's face it, time is the great equalizer with everything regarding strength sports. The longer, any sport, the longer you're exposed to these stimuli, the better a result you're going to get. So why have we adopted this perspective of waiving them so heavily when you can have moderate stimulus the entire year instead of peaking then dropping, peaking then dropping? And I think that for a lot of people, that's where things can start to fall apart.
Yeah, definitely. And I can understand the argument coming from a rigid mindset and the reason why they probably would undulate specific qualities throughout the year. And I generally think, well, if you're just going to, this is what I'm guessing their argument would be. They don't believe in maintenance, or they will not believe that you can enhance multiple qualities at once at a fast rate. Therefore, you're only going to maintain and you're not going to get that constant progression where you really have to progressively overload and you have to smash that specific quality to create an adaptation in order to the stress that you're placing upon the body. This is where I disagree, and especially working with combat sport athletes, as there's many moving parts and the sport is chaotic in nature. And what you usually see is coaches in the off season will prioritize hypertrophy strength, work on niggles and things like that. And then as they get closer to competition, they start prioritizing power blocks to minimize the eccentric loading so they're not so sore, so that their skill set comes first. Now, I find a flaw in that system because I honestly believe if it doesn't mean that you need to smash out, 5 sets of three at, a specific percentage in order to create, a power adaptation or to get that athlete to move faster. I think that if you can work up to utilize RPE, but you don't have to smash out copious amounts of volume and reps in order to chase those specific qualities. I think that if you can actually just stimulate and keep that general exposure throughout the year, you're definitely going to have great success with your athletes. And that's what I found with my combat sport athletes. We don't have a reductionist approach where we take something away at the sacrifice of something else. We if something's working, we try to keep that in all year round. If something is not working and we can kind of like, as time being a constraint, and it's like, well, is the juice worth the squeeze here? Do we really need to be adding this certain component in? Can we just scrap that and obviously prioritize something that is going to be more beneficial to the athlete? Then that's how we'd usually go in that sense. And do you find that that's more of a bottoms up approach in terms of using more of a rigid top down approach is what you're currently using now with your clients and athletes?
That's definitely the theory or the model that's been prevailing at the moment. Because I think the big difference between, well, there's many differences between the top down, bottom up kind of dichotomy. But for a lot of people with that bottoms up approach, they understand that it's not about pushing a quality till someone breaks. Like within a good quality system, there's negative feedback loops. When something starts to go astray, it'll start pulling it back in the other direction. Whereas with training, people just treat it like a goddamn, there's a button that completely empties the bucket or completely fills it. They're like, we're going to do this till you fucking break, and then we're going to backpedal, try and bring in these other things to minimize the damage. Because do you remember who said the quote "stimulate, don't annihilate"? I've heard so many people say it, but
Same.
I can't remember who was the
I think it
first
was.
one.
I think I first heard it from Will Ratelli. I don't know if I said his name right. Will Rattel. That's the first
We'll
guy.
go with Ratelli because that sounds way cooler.
It sounds more Italian. He's Italian, I'm guessing. Yeah. Rigatoni. We'll
I
go
didn't
for
think so.
rigatoni. I'm not sure Brandon would be too happy with that one. Okay, so yeah, as you were saying, stimulate, don't annihilate. You're going on that
Yeah,
topic.
because if you're looking at it from that perspective, that's how you're going to have these bottom up integrations where you have just enough of the specific quality that you want to progress. And once you've filled that slot, you don't necessarily need more of it.
Hmm.
When people will be under the assumption that, if some of this is good, then much more of this is going to be better. When really the rate of progression, all I care about is that there's some sort of rate of positive progression.
Mm.
I don't care if it's the quickest or if it's the slowest, because if time is the equalizer, you'll eventually get to that peak. And chances are that the slower rates of progression are probably going to come with less drawbacks and more opportunities to key into that negative feedback loop. If you've blown past your possible total volume tolerance by 50 sets, you can't really make changes from there besides a large scale cutback. Whereas if you've pushed over your total volume prescription or you've done a little bit too much workload, the fatigue trough that you've dug yourself isn't so great that you're going to have to take a massive step to resolve it. You can just slowly pull it back. A session or two of less intensity is going to bring you back into the green, as opposed to going so far into the red that you're now just this puddle on the floor.
Totally agree. Now, do you feel like with most SNC, not most SNC coaches, but what you're seeing today with rigid algorithmic models that don't take into the constraints outside of an athlete's performance, poor sleep, you know, a lack of nutrition, whatever it may be in terms of time constraints, environmental constraints, there are many things that can inhibit what you had set out planned for that athlete. This is, I guess, where the BPS model kind of comes into it to some degree. I obviously working with combat sport athletes, I can't design a program longer than 4 weeks. Like that's my pretty much
Mm.
that's my top down approach is 4 weeks, right? That's as rigid as it gets, with the utilization of RPE and some of the programs that I've seen out there. It's quite alarming, and some of the athletes that have reached out to me saying they feel broken, you know, one of the actual prescriptions for secondary exercises was 5 sets of 12 on Bulgarian split squats. Jesus. I'm like, man, how's this guy going to walk the next day to perhaps go and do some wrestling on the mats? How are they going to do their striking practice? And this athlete was like, I'm just too sore. I just only did 2 or 3 sets. And I said, yeah, no fucking wonder. Like, you're going to auto-regulate yourself. You're naturally going to go, this is like, not even a trained coach can see that and just go, this is just too much volume for a combat sport athlete. Like, there's just too much going on. I was quite surprised that that
Mm.
was the prescription, but when it comes down to like trying to not forecast, but when you are designing a training block, you it's very common that you'll get an athlete coming in and go, I rolled funny on the mat and I kind of tweaked something in my knee and it hurts to go into deep knee flexion. So you automatically know you need to adjust the program on the fly consistently, little tweaks throughout the week, or just redirect so that they're not actually going to fall off the bandwagon, but it's just more of a viable option in terms of how we steer the program. Are you obviously with the type of clientele you're working with, they're not going to be exposed to as much unpredictable, chaotic nature in terms of like combat sports with force going against force. So how do you find with your systems, do you find that you're able to be slightly more rigid in terms of being able to stick to a specific block and look at the adaptions and look at, you know, the applications can still stay in place, or are they continuously changing as within those weeks to within that block as well?
I think that for me, because there's just so so many less inputs going into the athlete, it does allow for slightly more of a rigid framework for how much work I'm prescribing them. Although within that rigid framework, I do allow more opportunities than I think most people would for people to turn those dials up and down. For me, I subscribe to a model that there's a certain amount of work that can be done in a session that's positive, or a certain amount of work that will create the response that we want. And if someone doesn't have a time bound goal, if someone doesn't have a competition coming up, I could give zero fucks whether they're at the bottom end of that specific amount or at the top end. As long as they're within it, I kind of don't care. And that range is a lot bigger than most people would think. So for me, building out, say, I probably say 6 weeks is as far as I would go. Probably wouldn't go past 8. But within that, the range of work that that person can do, it's quite substantial. I'll very rarely give specific RPEs unless I have a weight that I know that person's going to be utilizing if I've seen a lot of their work and I know roughly where they should be. But for a lot of people, the majority of their workload saying, cool, you're going to be between whatever it is, 70 and 85%. If you feel good on the day, push up to 85. If you feel bad on the day, push down to 70. And I think that was informed by the way that I used to program. I used to hold hands quite a lot. I'd update things weekly. I'd try to micromanage. And I was realizing that the people on those more flexible plans were actually getting better results than the people who I was babying and trying to overcorrect for those lifestyle factors. And I think that it is important to understand that the BPS model plays a pivotal role in what we're prescribing. But it's also like, probably not going to change a plan if someone has one night of bad sleep, unless they start to show indications that performance is going downhill. And it's not even that acute. Like, one night of bad sleep might affect your session a week and a half from now. It might not affect it for the following day prior to that bout. And that's something that I think people can probably go a little bit too hard into, and it's overutilizing that lifestyle based approach. When if you just give someone the information to say, look, this is the goal or the intent of the session. If you hit that intent, I'm pretty happy, because you're going to do 200 sessions this year. And if you do 200 sessions within that range of relatively adequate intensity, you're going to be a fucking monster by the end of it.
We hope so. So, in terms of, that's a great point. When you look at, like, for example, what you just said then, where you don't give them a rigid RPE prescription. I'm kind of the same, but I will give them more than just one number. I will say, okay, let's aim for a 7 to 8 on your final set of that. Like, let's say, for example, we have 5-5-4-4. I'll say use the first 3 sets as like a ramping RPE based on how you feel. When you put that bar back on the rack or on the ground, I want you to step away. What's the first number that comes to your mind? And that's pretty much how you're going to guide pick the next weight for the next set. Right. So we might say, start your first set at a 5 RPE. You're going to progress that to a 6 or 7 RPE. You're going to finish your final set on an 8 to 9 RPE. And you should feel like you wouldn't be able to do another rep. Or if you were to do 2 more reps, you'd fail that second rep. That's the kind of intensity we're chasing. Now, when you work with a combat sport athlete, this is where it can get tricky, because the mindset behind it, where say one week they feel great and they finish a Zercher squat at a top set of an 8 RPE for 5 reps, right, on a week. The next week they come in, they've had a big week of rolling, they've had a big week of sparring, they might have tweaked something and they've got the same prescription where it might be 4-4-3-3, and they have a top set of 9 RPE on, but they still lift 80 kilos for the top set of 3 that they did last week, because that felt like a 9 out of 10 for them on that specific day. It doesn't mean they're going backwards. And this is the biggest thing, where the reason why I love RPE so much is because it can take in a lot of the constraints that we can't control as coaches because they're not robots and not athletes. It still provides a certain constraint and an intent to work towards, but I do think it is underutilized in a lot of strength and conditioning programs, especially with the coaches' work that I have seen. A lot of it is percentage-based, rigid stuff, where each week there's a certain percentage progression, and I look at that and it just gives me anxiety because I could never hit the percentages when I was a client myself at one stage with these coaches, and I could never hit the fucking percentages. I used to get frustrated, and I'd always feel like I would burn out, or I would always feel like I'm going backwards. I go, well, this isn't. Maybe I'm just not. I'm not good enough, or I'm not. You kind of beat yourself up and think, well, maybe I'm just a pussy. Maybe I'm just weak. Maybe I'm. You do, and you question yourself. So
I get what you mean.
I'm constantly communicating, saying, you're not going to feel 100% every session. That's okay. Do the best you can with that intent. And if that feels like it is a 9 out of 10 for you, then that's you, and that's teaching an athlete to think for themselves. So, like you said, you're not holding their hand in every single session. You're not doing those micro tweaks and making sure that it's to the percentage, to the T. And that was obviously early in my career doing powerlifting blocks as well. You do see those rigid models, and I remember days of trying to hit low bar back squats at fucking 85% of my 1 rep max for sets of 3. And mate, I used to walk out of the session and I'd have to book in with a physio to get dry needling done 2-3 times a week just to get through the week of training. And it definitely did inhibit. I reckon the amount of compression I put through my body at that stage, any sport I did, I'd be terrible at. I just couldn't move. I was like a fucking cinder block. And I'm pretty sure you probably would have experienced that squatting the weights that you did and stuff. So, yeah, I'll let you
Before we move on,
Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in and kind of say the piece that I think for me made such a humongous shift from going from a sport where training was the sport to understanding the framework where training is a complement to sport, and why those RPE based models work so well is, one, you're providing a framework for someone to understand what's hard and what's not hard. And two, you're shifting their mindset to understand that you're chasing the benefit of a movement. You're not chasing to get better at the movement. Because I could not give a single fuck if someone's a field sport athlete. I don't really care if their squat progresses over the course of a block. What I care about is if the outcomes on the field have progressed because of the work that I've done. And that's all that matters.
And that's true, right? But then you've got to look at, well, let's say their progress isn't progressing, right? You get this athlete stronger and it's not progressing and it's having a negative transfer. That's where it can get tricky. Well, because we've been told that certain specific qualities will have a positive transfer to a particular skill. And this is where it kind of gets a bit dicey. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but we that's a whole nother. We'll leave that for another month. When we reconnect, we'll talk about that later on, because it is a question that is burning in the back of my mind a lot. Now, you and I have had some discussions about the compression expansion model, rethinking the big patterns and stuff like that. I'm going to have Pat Davidson on soon on the podcast, and I reckon we're going to have a great chat and really pick his brain about, rethinking the big patterns. Now, what's your experience with the compression expansion model? Has that changed or shaped your views on prescription in terms of the way you write plans and the way you look and analyze certain human beings? Because I can tell you now, every person I look at, I'm trying to look at their feet, the way they walk, the width of their torso, their shoulder, and I'm obsessed with it. And I'm starting to notice these trends with every single client I train. And I just want to know what your thoughts are on that, and how if you're familiar with it and how it's shaped your views on coaching.
The first introduction that I've had to that sort of stuff was from PRI, Zach Couples, and Pat Davidson. They were kind of the three big ones that I looked into early on, and Bill Hartman, but his stuff still confuses the shit out of me.
It's the way
They were
he
the first
explains it.
ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, those ones were the ones that first informed my understanding of that. And I think that it can get really in depth into the weeds of biomechanics, and it can just confuse a lot of people. So my understanding of the compression expansion model and how I apply it to my athletes is understanding that people have orientations that they're going to be more inclined to move towards.
Mm-hmm.
They have movement solutions that are informed by the way that their bits and pieces are put together. You have someone who's built like a brick shithouse and wider than a 2-barn door, they're going to move a certain way. You have somebody who's built like a stick, they're going to move a certain way. And it's understanding the dichotomy between these different shapes that informs these choices. Understanding how ribcage mechanics work and how the respiratory mechanics work on a deeper level has helped me a lot as well, especially understanding that stiffness up until a certain point is great. If you have a geriatric person who can't manage their own center of mass and they're one fall away from dying, you need to compress the shit out of them. Because if they're more compressed, they're probably going to bounce when they hit that second step when they go to pick up their cucumbers from the garden. It's great for them. But it gets to a certain point where if you decrease these movement options enough with enough compression, you're just going to steal someone's ability to rotate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where a lot of these pieces kind of fit together. The example that you said before, that when somebody is doing and undergoing these activities, which we think should be helping their performance, but it's not, it's probably a sign that you've pushed them too far down one of these extremes. And as soon as somebody's too far in one direction, that's where the new center comes. A lot of those concepts from Gary Ward's
Mm.
work, I really love how he explains neutral, or that center point for whatever movements that you're undergoing, is shifted in comparison to where you're comfortable. Say, for example, you have somebody who has a really wide infrasternal angle. They're going to have certain movement options that are now just completely unavailable because they've got so much compression front to back that, one, their scapula can't move in really any meaningful way, and two, the only way they can now rotate is by orienting their body in left or right. They're the only options available. So taking a person like that and using some of these respiratory concepts to help bring back some compression laterally will
Mm.
restore some of these actions.
Do you think more compression front to back for wide ISAs, you mean, so that they can, usually they're squashed front to back, and then laterally they're kind of really wide, and they're like, when you, there's no one size fits all with this. One thing that I found was it's just a guideline, and there's going to be outliers that'll be a bit of both. I question myself on the daily, and I'm looking at my ribs in the mirror, and I'm like, I'm wide, man. I got to be fucking wide because I'm stiff as shit, right? And I don't
mm,
rotate too well. But like you said with the respiratory stuff, when I lay on my back in a 90-90 position, um, just feet up on the wall and in a supine position, and when I breathe, it's almost like it's a nice sensation, but I get a kind of spasm in the middle of my thoracic, and it almost
mm,
feel like I get a few cracks while I'm actually breathing into the rib cage, and I can even feel my sternum like pop a little bit and get that space through there. And I tell you what, it's this sounds a bit fucking, a bit. It might sound like nonsense to some people, just getting your like getting you to breathe properly. But I found that it's improved my shoulder pain dramatically in the way that my shoulder blades move across my rib cage, and just
mm.
by sitting on the ground, even side lying, I found as well. Even though side lying, probably using the ground as a constraint or feedback to kind of push into to create lateral expansion. I was listening to Bill Hartman, and he said, with, let's say you're in a side lying position, he said it's great because it kind of forces, when you're laying on your side, gravity will push your rib cage down, and then when you're breathing, you'll get front to back expansion. and compression when you're obviously, breathing in and out. And at night, I'm always beat up from wrestling. I'll lay in a side lying position, and this is before I go to bed. I'll do 15 deep breaths, and I could just feel the stiffness around my thoracic, my scapula, and by the 10th rep, it starts to free up. And honestly, like, that seems to give me the biggest relief when it comes to getting my arms overhead, getting more protraction, and getting a lot more serratus engagement, and getting those things to with my reaching exercises. Definitely a big improvement there. Would you consider yourself a wide ISA?
No. So for me, I am inherently narrow, but I'm a narrow who's tried to compress myself front to back to make use of those strategies. And this is where things can get weird because you can have wides who present with narrow movement options and actions, and narrows that present with wide actions. So it's kind of like you have somebody, if you look at me, I'm tall, I'm slender, I'm probably never going to be a world champion powerlifter. But what happens if I try to be one? I'll adopt the compensations and I'll adopt the presentations that make a good powerlifter. So I'll try and compress front to back to create more of those actions and more of those presentations. But I'm not really built to do that. And I think that this comes down to a really cool understanding of how the rib cage actually works and how, as humans, we're really, really good at compensating. So, two big pieces to understand when you're talking infrasternal angle, because I know a lot of people, these words are said a lot, but people don't understand what it means. The infrasternal angle is just how much distance or the angle between the lower ribs at your xiphoid process. So the little piece at the bottom of your rib cage. And what's really cool to understand is how you're presenting is showing you what options you don't have at a rib cage. So you have a couple of different types and a couple of different ways that your rib cage can expand. You have something called bucket handle breathing, where your lower ribs will kind of flare out laterally, and you have pump handle breathing, where your sternum can come up and down like the pump handle of a well. But yeah, you have the differentiation between bucket handle and pump handle, and your body's going to present whichever one that it doesn't have. So, say for someone who's wide, they can't use an inhalation strategy. So, inhalation strategy would be getting pump handle in that upper rib cage area. So, they'll expand the lower portion greater. So, somebody who is presenting as a wide is using an inhaled strategy at the lower ribs because they can't create inhalation at the top end. So instead of getting the sternum to inflate and get 360 expansion of a rib cage, they just crush it down and blow the sides out. Same thing for someone who's narrow. Because they can't fully exhale the top position of their rib cage and get that bucket hand to push down, they just crimp the fuck out of the sides of their ribs. And that's what brings and cinches that rib cage in and pushes that expansion in different areas. And once you can understand which aspects and part of the ribs aren't doing what they're doing, so for you, an inhalation strategy and getting that pump handle up is what's going to provide more relief for shoulder pain or allow your scapula to glide more comfortably. For someone like me, getting the bucket handle up and creating compression front to back will provide me more movement options. And that's the piece that makes understanding the ISA quite a lot easier.
Definitely. I think it's just restoring the relative ranges based on your makeup that you're lacking. And there's going to be certain biases towards certain exercises that will actually help with which type of archetype that you may be or what you're struggling with. So giving you those movement options back. Now, I think I'd rather be a narrow, man, honestly. I reckon, I reckon narrows, I look at narrow like they're just better at lifting. It's easy to teach a narrow to hinge. Like you can pick up hinging, you can create space where it's needed. They're a lot more bouncier. I don't know. I feel like wides are shit, man. It sucks because you're not. I think it's shit. Like, yeah, you kind of. If you look at, I want to look into the sports. I look at freestyle wrestling, man. I look at my coach and I look at the guys that I wrestle with, and they're all from eastern parts of Europe and stuff like that.
Mm.
They're all fucking narrow. But there's one guy from Siberia on the guy that we wrestle with. He's so fucking strong for his size. And I'm looking at his rib cage and I'm looking at it the way he moves. He's not as bendy as the other guys, and a little bit, he's so much fucking stronger. He's got like the perfect blend
Mm.
of kind of that strength to put into the ground, and like that grinding strength, and he can still be dynamic and move and rotate just enough to be able to get to the positions that he needs. But then my coach, he's like a fucking rubber band. He can twist and bend, and you know, internal rotation for him is quite easy to achieve. Now, one thing that kind of confused me a little bit is with wide ISAs, everything is out, right? Everything is presented out. The femur will be slightly externally rotated, but then the tibia will have a compensation pattern in some cases to internally rotate, so that you'll see this kind of foot that rolls off and supinates off the ground, trying to create those compensation. That's me to a T.
Mm.
That is. I can feel that. I can see that. And I've always struggled with femoral internal rotation. When you look at the pelvis, when they start talking about, when I was listening to Bill Hartman, the way he explains things can be a little bit confusing. And when that pelvis is sitting anteriorly and it's more retroverted, and you've got, looking at the way the femur, the shape of the femur and the way it sits in the socket, it's completely different. Like it was amazing when I actually looked on David Gray's, on the DGR Interactive site, and I saw it was a Greg Hawthorne. Is that his name? Greg Hawthorne, I think so. Yeah. And are you familiar with Greg Hawthorne? He does a great explanation on wide versus narrow ISAs and compensation patterns, and what exercises would, what we need more of towards working with wide versus narrow. And it made me second guess everything, because it kind of just confused me a little bit more. And it made me think, well, hold on a minute here. I feel like I'm quite springy, but if I'm considered a wide ISA, so the way he described it was, you have your respiratory system, you got your diaphragm, and you have your guts,
Mm.
right? This rib cage is like a cylinder that controls this smushing and moving of your guts around through space and gravity, right? And a wide ISA, we talk about, like you said, they need more inhalation strategies. And what it does, it draws. So when you breathe in, the opposite action is happening at the diaphragm, right? Where you're creating almost like a depression feeling to feel air through the bottom.
Mm.
Well, that's what I'm guessing, or to push things down as opposed to things being up. So when you look at, he said, a narrow ISA, they'll have like a little pooch, or like a little love handle, wrap around the lower part of their stomach. And he said wide ISAs find it harder to leave the ground and to be more elastic, to be more springy. So you would be getting them to do more extensive work in nature, and you'd want them to do more. Let's say if you're trying to enhance rotational capacity and capabilities within that particular person, you would get them doing ballistic methods with a med ball, so they're not having to slow down force. They're actually having to just let go and let the body relax into the rotation, as opposed to someone doing a chop with a loaded plate, but holding that loaded plate and not letting go of it, right? And that's something that you would use with a narrow ISA, where they would do more yielding plyometrics to kind of get them to do more strength-based, slow tempos, trying to create more compression in that sense. That's what it sounds like in working with narrow ISAs. That was his description of perhaps exercise biases towards those archetypes.
Mm.
And I don't know. it kind of can not confuse me, but it made me second guess um, my approach towards like certain athletes that I work with that are heavily compressed, because I feel like my wide guys can get off the floor really good too and are quite springy. So
Mm.
it just, I don't know if, have you delved into that much yourself?
Yes.
Have you
So
thought that deep into it?
yes, the piece that comes down to, let me organize because that's a really good question. I want to do it justice. Um, just because some of these presentations generally mean specific things, it doesn't mean that that's always the case. So if we're using correct and good quality training interventions, there's nothing stopping a wide from being springy because we can affect
Mm,
changes. It's not like these orientations doom you to never be good at anything on the opposite side. Some people may have more of a proclivity to pick it up quicker. Say someone like, if they present as a narrow, they're always going to inherently have more access to rotation based strategies. They're going to move better, they're
mm,
going to twist better. So, what you're saying with the approach for them is understanding, okay, they may move and twist better, but sometimes locking down those ranges of freedom are going to allow them to express force better because they might rotate too
mhm,
much. They might have too much access. So, utilizing those different approaches can help lock down the actions. Whereas on the flip side, someone who's wider per se, it doesn't mean they can't rotate because it's such an n of one position. They might be a little bit
mm,
wider than someone who's super wide. So I think that when someone initially says wide and narrow, it's easy to say, cool, this is what really wide looks like, and this is what really narrow looks like. Very rarely that you'll see any of them because a super wide person is the dude in the corner squatting 400. A super narrow person
mm,
is the dude yeeting a javelin further than I can throw a dinner plate at a wedding. So
mm.
looking at them in those
Yeah,
perspectives
definitely.
makes it really easy to understand, but the
Mm,
majority of people live in that middle ground. And that's where these things can get really hazy. Like you were mentioning before, the fluid mechanics of the viscera. And I fucking love talking about the fluid mechanics of the viscera because that reciprocal action of breathing and bracing, where the diaphragm descends and it allows the viscera to go into the bowl of the pelvis. Someone who's
mhm,
narrower is probably going to have a little bit more congruence between those two actions. So as the viscera pushes down into the bowl of their pelvis, the bowl of the pelvis
mm,
pushes up into their viscera, which creates like this
mhm.
weird piston action mechanic, which is super, super cool. And that helps
Yeah,
them leave the ground more effectively. Whilst a wide person,
exactly.
they're just going to displace everything forward. But on that same token, if someone's displaced everything forward, they're super wide. If you're on a football field, I don't want that dude running through me. Everything's
Mm,
projected forward and he's trained, so he's still hauling ass. So it's
yeah.
understanding that, yeah, these presentations do mean specific things, but very rare do you see people all the way in one direction. Some people will have
Mm,
characteristics from each, and diversifying your view and saying, cool, you're wide or you're wider than most. So this might mean some things, but let's see how you move. And that's why like FMS and stuff like that shits me because it's like, no, no, you look at the person in front of you, you look at how they move, and you build interventions on that. I don't give a fuck what your overhead stick squat looks like because you're probably going to be able to create an action that allows you to get overhead anyway. You'll cock the rib cage out a bit. You'll lean back a bit more. I don't care. Get into the position. You're an athlete. You'll be fine.
mm. Well, that's funny you bring up FMS and these shitty courses that offer no value to no one. And it's just another rigid model to put everyone into a scoring system. And mate, I felt like a piece of shit after the course because I flunked the fucking test on every single test, right? And it's like you do a squat. Nah, you're a three, or that's no good. Your total score is this. You need to work on this. You're going to be exposed to. You may be at risk of this injury, and it was all just. You look at it now, and I never used one. I left the course, and I've gone. What did we learn out of this? I was with my wife on the course, and I said, like, we did this like fucking. I don't even know. It was like 7 years ago. I did the course, And I always was instructed by a physio at the time who I looked up to, who instructed me to go and learn about PRI concepts, DNS,
Mm.
dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, I think it was called, and FMS as a tool, right? Just as an added tool for assessment, to be able to, just broaden my horizons as a coach and upskill. It was by far one of the worst courses I've taken part in. And I don't think anyone scored really well on the test. I think females did better than males on the test. Just purely, they could just get into better positions, and you would see the compensations take place in order to try and mimic these patterns and get into these positions, which was
Mm.
quite bloody useful. So I definitely think if you were trying to run this assessment for an athlete and you're going, oh, you're a 1 here or you're a 2, and putting a number on every single quality that they fucking did shit at, and go, here's your score, you're a piece of shit, this is what's going to happen if you, that's basically what you're saying in a way, in a way, by using labeling a number on that. That's more stuff that you would probably use, or that I experienced in the army, which was okay in that sense.
Mm.
You had to have a bit of a tough skin in everyone was a piece of shit in the army, so that's a bit different. But in terms of that, I definitely think that is a course. And if any coach is listening to this, do not do FMS. I'm sorry, but don't do it. Don't waste your money. There's a lot of better courses out there for you to take part in if you want to help your clients. Okay, I feel like I can talk about compression expansion bottles all day with you, but I want to move on from this topic, and I want to talk more about your sprinting and how it's feeling on your body in terms of that. And being a narrow ISA, do you find that um, obviously people look at running and they think it's a straight line, but there is a lot of rotation happening through the rib cage as you are going through the gait cycle, especially in mid stance max propulsion, where you'll see a lot of lateral flexion, slight rotation happening at the spine and the trunk, and a slight hip hike as you come through. I saw you on social media running with some sleds. Tell us a little bit about your experience, and how it felt to just fucking run fast, as opposed to being cemented under a barbell, being outdoors in the sun, shirt off, in the fucking skins, and you're out there sprinting, going as far hard as you can. For me, that is something that I really want to get into for just pure enjoyment, to see how it feels. But from your experience the following day, we were talking earlier, you're still currently sore at the moment. So
Mm.
give us a run through of what your session was.
So, to answer the first part of that, just being able to go out there and murk a couple of solid sprints down a track, nothing beats it. Especially if you've been in the position where you've either been injured or you've chosen a sport that limits what you can do so heavily. To just have the option to be able to go outside and run with a mate and do a couple of races, talk some shit, get some sun. I took your advice for the IG post, took the shirt off, got the nipples out. Nothing beats it.
It sells, mate. It sells.
But the session itself was actually an acceleration based session, because when you're looking at integrating running, you have the acceleration mechanics and you have the upright mechanics. And this may not be the most succinct explanation because I'm still getting my head back into it all, but each of those are going to have distinct demands on what tissues you're using more of and how much is going to beat the shit out of you. With things like acceleration mechanics, you're probably going to tear up your hamstrings a little bit less because the actions of the legs are a little bit more diagonal. There's a lot more forward lean. It's a much choppier action as you're running through. Whereas the upright mechanics have much more of a cyclical action of the leg. You come from full extension of the hip, you bring the leg up, bring it around, and drag yourself through. And that
Yes.
explanation of how running works, you're kind of clawing yourself through space. Like you're anchoring that front foot, and then the momentum that you've used carries you over that foot. So the session that we did with the sled was just accentuating those early acceleration mechanics, which for heavier people who don't have great access to the ranges that are needed to run quickly upright, you can just do way more work. Things like those and hill sprints, fantastic introductions. Because if you think about something like a hill sprint, the ground's coming to you quicker. You're not having to move as far because every step the gradient comes up with you. So something
Yes.
like that is a really cool introduction, and I loved the session.
Definitely. Well, you think about it, you'd be in more hip flexion as opposed, you'd be more in a hip hinge position in those acceleration mechanics where you're getting more horizontal force production out of the hole. It's interesting because I used to sprint as a kid, and I had a sprint coach who used to come to my house, and I remember I'd be up in the morning at 6:30 at the park at 12, 13 years old, and I paid him for PT sessions, right? I used to work on the weekends, get pocket money, and pay the sprint coach because I wanted to be fast. And I used to compete in long jump, high jump, 100, 200, 400, 800. I did it all. Right. Yeah. I was a shit thrower because I was just skinny, small, shit thrower. So didn't do any throwing events. Yeah, it was quite interesting, the stuff that I look back at it now, and I never really understood the concepts of it when you're younger. I was just did what I was told. But fuck, I got fast at some point once he started refining the way that I was actually running, and there's a lot to it. But then it also, you see like a lot of Angus Bradley's work and some other coaches, and I like their approach where there is no real perfect way, I think, but there's certain let's say there's certain bandwidths that you need to be within in order to be efficient in that sense. But that goes against the grain against in Olympic lifting, like when the arms bend, the power ends, right? That's something I was told as, early on in my coaching career. And I was like, don't bend your arms. They're just like ropes. Don't fucking bend your arms. I look back at all my Olympic lifting videos over the last month, just of me doing hang snatches. My arms are bent in every single pull, in every single, and I feel way better. And it's probably because I've chipped the bone off in my elbows, or it's just a compensation pattern, but it works. And you see some of these guys power cleaning. There's a guy you should look up, James Townsend. I was telling Brandon about it. He's an ex-CrossFitter. He's an ex-NFL player. Then he went to CrossFit, I think. And then he's a CrossFit coach now. But you look at him, man, it's like he bicep curls a fucking thing off the ground, but he power cleans 180 kilos off the floor. And he probably weighs about 88 kilos. Yeah, 88
Jesus.
kilos, man. I think he's 190 pounds, 195 pounds. I don't know the conversion. 2.2, I think it is per kilo. But yeah, it's amazing to watch this guy, how athletic he is. And you look at him like he's just built like a sprinter. You got high calves and long, skinny features, but massive ab gut on him and just a freak. So when it comes back to sprinting, yeah, it's interesting, like to see those concepts where they can be like, there's coaches that have that rigid mindset, and then there's people that think outside the green and go, well, why is this the case? Why is this guy run so fucking fast and it looks completely opposite to what we've been told? And it's almost like when you drive a car and you see a racing car driver, and you look at Formula One, everyone has similar entries. Or I did, for an example, I did a 10 days, sorry, not 10 days. I did 10 laps, hot laps at Eastern Creek, right? I was driving a V8 supercar. And I was instructed on how to enter these corners. He's like, okay, I want you to take it wide, take your foot off the gas, let it roll. Don't put your foot on the brake, stay in third gear and attack this corner. It was taking at 180 kilometers an hour. Then I got the luxury of being a passenger with a supercar driver, and he took me through a few hot laps. fuck me, the way he attacked these corners, completely different. And I was shitting myself. I was like, mate, okay, how come we were told to attack it like this as opposed to what the way you're attacking the corners? Why aren't we doing it this way? And it was totally, completely opposite. Where he wasn't. It was like hit the fucking corner at 200 kilometers an hour, brake, gear down, change, and then take off and go in the other direction. It's just amazing to see that there's more viable options to do or execute a particular skill than what's being told on or what's been ingrained in us. And I think that's important. That's kind of the message I'm trying to get across from that big fucking whirlwind that I just took you through. So,
But a
all
good
right.
caveat to that is you only have the luxury to explore those unique ways of doing things if you have enough options to do so. If you have enough options within your ability to move, that means that you're going to be able to explore solutions that might be unique to you. And not everyone gets those really cool, unique options. Some people are just lucky enough to have, they're just freaks and they're able to do things that other people can't. But you'll never know exactly the right way to do things until you have as many options available as possible and you try lots of different ways and figure out, you know what, this one feels pretty fucking good. I'm probably not going to clean 200, but I probably wasn't going to do that anyway because I wasn't stolen from my village and pumped full of mastron. But I can do a decent, I can clean a decent amount.
Dynabol, they're feeding it to him as kids. Fucking hell. Oh my gosh. Great point, man. What you just said then is something that I preach a lot about in my communication with potential hobbyists and athletes that I want to work with, the importance of mobility training for grappling sports. And by doing the sport yourself, you can feel the demands, and you know that the guys that move better in general, that can achieve better positions, have more than one way of finishing a takedown. They have more options to get around the specific task. And that is something I'm always harping on about. And it's funny that you pointed that out. And I guess it goes across any other sport as well. And I had a great chat with Lucas Aaron about it, who's fantastic with mobility in achieving extreme ranges. In grappling sports, you are going to be exposed to extreme ranges that are not slowing they're fast contractions where you have to produce force in order to resist losing a position or being submitted or losing points or actually hurting yourself. So it's a great concept, and this is another topic that we're going to delve into quickly just before we wrap things up. The difference between relative ranges of motion and achieving extreme ranges of motion. Now, there's a big difference there where you're something that I really struck with me from David Gray, and credit to him. He's an awesome human being that's definitely shaped and changed the way that a lot of people look at movement. And I had a great chat with him on his course, and I said, why is it that when I try to achieve these extreme ranges of motion, I feel tighter and I feel shit the next day? And he said, it's because you're fighting compression and you're fighting tension with tension, not being able to relax and not giving yourself back the relative ranges first to be able to relax into these extreme ranges. Obviously, you being a narrow ISA, you're probably going to have more viable options in terms of ranges of motion to be able to achieve than someone like myself who's, a wider ISA, a bit more compressed. Have you had any experience in terms of working with your athletes or clients trying to achieve more extreme ranges of motion?
So, with the problem of extreme ranges of motion, I think that for a lot of people, the inherent want for their body to lock things down, to decrease the complexity of how to move, is fairly apparent. Say, if you're trying to get someone to perform an action that requires each joint to articulate in a certain way, there's a lot of things there for your body to have to manage. So what they're going to do is freeze down some of these actions to decrease the movement options and produce the best one possible. It isn't until those relative ranges are available and you have access to each individual piece that you're able to enter these extreme ranges and do something with them. There's no point, and it's not a well thought out example, but if you're looking at how a spine works, each vertebra has access to a certain amount of extension and flexion and lateral, whatever it has. You're always going to be able to bend your spine more if each of those pieces articulates to their fullest extent, as opposed to just taking where lumbar and thoracic joints together and fucking cranking her down the middle. And that's the difference between them. If you're trying to enter a relative range without the faculty, if you're trying to enter these extreme ranges without the relative range to move each joint as it should be moved, you're just going to take 1 point between them and try to create all the movement from there, which kind of defeats the point. Because if you're only trying to achieve a position and not trying to get into that position by manipulating the joints in a certain way, you're just fighting, as David said, tension with tension. You're taking the parts that are tight, finding the least tight point, and going, let's just get this one bending.
Pretty much breaking yourself into the position.
Yeah.
And it's that's the biggest takeaway from what you just said. Get the joints moving. Look at the joints, not the muscles. Like the muscles will appear a certain way from the position of the joints. And I think that's a big key takeaway here is to get those joints moving. So, Zach, we're going to wrap things up now. Where can people find you?
So people can find me on my website, which is just ktsystems.co. You can check out my Instagram, which is Zach_Kongonis. Coaching and everything is available through there. And hopefully by the end of November, there'll be a brand new program fresh and off the press that people can start exploring some of these concepts.
Awesome, mate. That's exciting. So where can people pay you?
Right in my link tree. There's a link that specifically says coaching. And if you want to be coached by me and explore weightlifting, sprinting, powerlifting, general movement, you want to get better at field sport preparation, we'll figure something out. So click that button and send me some of those shekels.
Awesome, mate. So basically, if you just want to be better at life, reach out to Zach. He'll make you just a more well-rounded human being. Hey, thanks for coming on. Just before we wrap things up, guys, if you like this episode, please give it a like, give it a share, give me a follow, give Zach a follow. That way, or even leave a comment, whether you liked it or hated it, whatever. I just want to know some feedback so we can keep moving in the right direction. Zach and I are going to look to be doing something like this once a month, talking about topics that we are just perhaps interested about and just have a good chat and feed off each other and just continually try to be better coaches. So thanks again, mate. I look forward to speaking to you next month.
Thank you very much, man. Appreciate it.